And you've been following the gavel-to-gavel coverage with us there of the very high-profile and intense murder trial surrounding the death of Ahmaud Arbery. The court taking a break for lunch now. I want to go ahead and bring in our Alex Presha, who is outside the courthouse there in Brunswick, Georgia. He's been following this for us from the very beginning. Also, former homicide prosecutor Bernarda Villalona joining us now, and criminal defense attorney Tamika McKoy. Wow, you know, I think since I have both Bernarda and Tamika, I've got the prosecution side and the defense side with both of you. I just want to hear how you both think this just went down. It sort of silenced the court there for a second when we saw the video, Roddy Bryan's video, from the very beginning to the entire end as he was in his truck heading toward Ahmaud Arbery as that chase was on, and then you heard the gunshots, and then you finally saw Ahmaud Arbery go down. I mean, that was it. That was the entire video. Why don't we start, Bernarda, with you from the side of the prosecution. How did they do questioning this police officer, Ricky Minshew, the second officer that arrived on the scene there? He was the first one actually to arrive, but the second one to have a body cam and arrive at the scene. The questions that were taken to him on behalf of the prosecution, I mean, what stood out to me was they made that very point that when Minshew connected with Roddy Bryan, the third defendant there who took that video, that he told Officer Minshew at that time that he never saw a weapon, he never heard any verbal threats on behalf of Ahmaud Arbery, that there was no report of any crime, and that there was, he didn't say anything about saying anything to Arbery that you are under arrest for burglary, alleged burglary, aggravated assault, nothing like that. That was a powerful moment.
Absolutely. The prosecution did an excellent job in terms of doing the direct examination of Officer Minshew. What were the key pieces of evidence that you got out, and what was the purpose of that evidence? It is clear through this officer that the testimony that came out was regarding defendant William Bryan. So what was important about it? They got into the key facts of, one, the citizen's arrest. What was important to weaken that defense is that William Roddy Bryan stated, should we have been following? I don't know. So based on that two lines right there, that weakens the defense of citizen's arrest. Now, if you weaken the defense of citizen's arrest, then what do you have? You have a man that has been chasing Ahmaud Arbery and has confined him and detained him for the other two guys, father and son duo, to be able to kill him. What's important about that is because William Roddy Bryan, while he did not pull the trigger, he assisted in detaining Ahmaud Arbery, and hence, because of that false imprisonment, and you have the felony murder charge, if you are guilty of the false imprisonment, then you're also guilty of the homicide, because the false imprisonment led to the homicide. There's so many pieces of evidence that came out through this officer that is crucial. You got his statements. You got that Ahmaud Arbery was unarmed. You got William Bryan, who did not know what had happened, did not know whether Ahmaud Arbery was armed, didn't state that he was armed, and didn't know why he was even following him.
So, Tamika, as a criminal defense attorney, how do you come in now after hearing all of that and respond, cross-examine?
So the defense is going to have a challenge. Remember, when they started with the opening, there were two characterizations. The state wanted to basically present that this was an attack, that the McMichaels and Bryan pursued Arbery to attack him and ultimately kill him. And the defense basically wanted to paint the picture that this was a justified shooting, that they were effectuating a citizen's arrest, and in doing so, defended themselves from a threat of harm that Arbery had posed. But they are going to have an uphill battle because the prosecutor did skillfully point out points in Bryan's first statement to the police that would seem to eviscerate, you know, the threat that Arbery posed to the McMichaels. So they are going to have a challenge in their cross, but the things that they're going to bring out in the cross is the fact that Arbery was trespassing and other factors that they talked about in their opening that gives the McMichaels some justification in their mind to say a crime had happened. It's an uphill battle because the video basically says what it was that actually occurred, but the defense is in a disadvantage right now with the state skillfully bringing out that set of facts from Bryant.
Right, and Tamika, when you look at that video in its entirety, who's attacking who?
Exactly, and that's going to be what the challenge is. The defense basically has to reconcile the video showing the opposite of what they want to show. So one of the things that they initially brought out was that it's an incomplete characterization of what had happened because there were moments before the video began that they want to argue is why the McMichaels felt a threat of danger. But the video kind of belies that point. And that's going to be the hardest evidence for the defense to have to grapple with.
Alex, you're there outside the courtroom. You've been following everything from moment to moment. As we continue this conversation, what stands out to you?
Well, a couple of things, because we have these dueling narratives that we heard in opening statements from the prosecution and the defense, right? The defense painting this neighborhood as one that had been under attack and had faced rising crime. And you heard one of the first questions to former Officer Minshew was to describe this sector. And he said, well, it's one of the largest in our region. It's also one of the ones with the lowest crime rate, which is a direct counter to that framework that the defense had put forth. I think also, for folks inside that courtroom, yes, they have seen that cell phone video, but seeing the entirety of it, this is extended video, along with the testimony from Officer Minshew about what transpired before hearing the conversation that he had with the truck with the McMichaels in it as it passed by. Hey, y'all got him. That assumption that Arbery had done something wrong and just his natural inclination to go along with what the McMichaels had done, that really kind of counters this narrative that's been painted by the defense. And as was pointed out before, that's something that they're going to have to battle back with this cross-examination. But also inside the courtroom, this is the first time when we heard word of a possible second body camera video. It didn't play out, but we heard word that there was a second body camera video. It was the first time that we actually saw the mother of Ahmaud Arbery, Wanda Cooper Jones, leave the courtroom. Now, why she left, if it was particularly because she thought it was going to play out, we don't know, but it was the first time, notably, that she exited the courtroom. She's back in. And also, I was told that the wife of Gregory McMichael, Lee McMichael, the mother of Travis, who pulled the trigger, is also inside that courtroom and appeared to be looking down at an iPad at various points during testimony today. But again, it's really stark to see that because they're sitting feet from each other. This is a closed, confined space, and both are paying adamant attention to the ongoings during court today.
So, Bernarda, as a former homicide prosecutor, I thought it was interesting because I wasn't quite sure where the prosecution was going. First of all, they laid out Minshew's background, Ricky Minshew's background, and it was kind of all over the place. He was with one police department for a short period of time, and then he went into retail, and then he was with another police department for a certain amount of time. It wasn't very long, and now he's in mill production. So I thought, okay, where are they going with this, right? Kind of setting up his background and his resume. And as we were listening, as we went on and on and on, I was wondering where the prosecution was going because they were questioning him about his conversation with Roddy Bryan. And then he said he actually got into the car with Roddy Bryan to look at the video that he had shot of this whole incident, and then said he tried to send the video to get it right to, back to the police department. but he couldn't send it because it was too large, so he tried to crop it. And did you sort of feel like they were trying to set up some sort of relationship here where maybe Minshew was trying to help Brian out in some way, kind of a buddy-buddy, and maybe get him out of trouble?
So no, not at all. So what the prosecution was doing and laying out what is the background of this officer is something that is common with all officers and expert witnesses that testify, is that you want their background to come out because you want to establish some sense of background in terms of credibility of why this officer was there, who is this officer, who is this person, and that's how you lay out the facts just so they can put everything into context. Now, in regards to the video itself, so it is very common what happens, because especially in homicides here in Brooklyn and New York City, is that there are cameras everywhere. So in order to get immediate information out to the detectives division or the investigation squad so they can start working on the case, is that if there is video that needs to be downloaded, they'll take their personal cell phones and record it, whether it's from another cell phone or whether it's from a video system, and then send that off until it's properly downloaded. So I'm not concerned about that. I will say this, in terms of him, this officer getting in the car with William Bryan, I'm concerned because it's a rookie move. You should not have gotten into the car because the car itself is a crime scene. Both of the pickup trucks are crime scenes. How do you know they're crime scenes? Because you're soon going to hear during the testimony is that Ahmaud Arbery's T-shirt fibers were recovered from the side of the vehicle of William Bryan. So he shouldn't have got it into the car, but they'll tie it again during closing arguments like, look, this officer, former officer, was a rookie at the time. He's not a crime scene investigator, so he didn't know any better. And aside from that, he hadn't known all the facts of what took place. It's still an investigation.
Right, that was my first impression was, whoa, that was like kind of a really, not only a rookie move, but a bit of a friendly move. I mean, getting into the vehicle, sitting next to him, looking at this video. Tamika, how could that, play for the defense?
Well, it shows the context that this had occurred in, because remember, one of the defendants was a former employee for the prosecutor's office that's local, and it's common for them to cross paths and have friendly relationships with each other. With the jury, it's gonna essentially enable for the defense to create the impression that these defendants were not threatening. The police didn't feel threatened by them. They were comfortable in gathering the information, and so they should be believable. This is a case about context and about nuance. The language that's used is very nuanced. The prosecutor uses terms such as gunned down, cornered, and that is to negate the allegation that this was self-defense and that Arbery provided or threatened the McMichaels and Bryan with harm. The defense is going to use other language. They're going to use killing because it's less of a psychological connotation that someone did something wrong. Make it more accidental, make it more incidental, as if the McMichaels didn't intend to kill Arbery. It just transpired that way. And once he came towards him and tried to disarm him of his weapon, that was where the threat had occurred. But language and nuance is critical in this case. And the fact that the officer, took liberties that wouldn't normally happen is part of the undertone, in the case in terms of how they were treated as suspects initially, the fact that they weren't originally charged. These are things that will play in the court of public opinion. In terms of the actual trial itself, it will relate to the jury certain emotional triggers once they hear certain terms, and whatever resonates is what they're going to essentially go with.
There's also this assumption, and I'm going to take this to Alex first, and then, ladies, I would like you to respond. We're hearing over and over again this lack of response to giving Ahmaud Arbery medical attention, whether it was from the defendants, apparently not one of them tried to go over to him and offer CPR or try to save his life after this. And then now we're learning that neither officer that responded to the scene, went right over to tend to Ahmaud Arbery and give some type of medical attention. Minshew even saying that he heard that death rattle when he arrived on the scene, which is that sort of last breath you take before you pass away. Alex, you noticed Arbery's mom actually responding to that when Minshew was talking about the fact that he heard the death rattle, right?
Absolutely, and you have to know that. I mean, if you are the mother of a child who was killed and you're hearing about your child's last moments, that's got to be tough. And she's been in there for the vast majority of these courtroom proceedings, and so to hear about your son, your now lost son, who's gasping for air with that death rattle. As was described by former officer Minshew, I mean, that's got to be difficult, right? I mean, you can only imagine. And she has had reactions in the courtroom to this. I mean, you heard her when that cell phone video played out in its entirety on Friday. She had an audible cry today. Also had some heavy sighs and deep breaths during some of the testimony, and certainly during some of those crime scene photos from investigator Ramos that were incredibly graphic, seeing her son like that. And so, look, these are investigators, these are police officers. It is their job to respond to these scenes, and so oftentimes, they're using language that's it's kind of clinical, if you will, but still. You recognize that these are loved ones or someone's loved one, and they're reacting to the images that they're seeing and also the words that they're hearing throughout these proceedings.
So, Bernarda, shouldn't we at some point, at least from one of the officers, heard from them? I went over, I checked his pulse. There was no pulse. I mean, shouldn't we have heard something when it comes to protocol when you're responding to the scene of someone who's been shot, instead of, well, it looked like he had bled out and was deceased?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm actually disappointed in how the officers, both officers, the first as well as the second officer, that responded, in the sense that they didn't at least check for a pulse on Ahmaud Arbery. I can understand, yes, I heard a gasp. He wasn't moving. He was bleeding out. But at the very least, I think they should have checked for a pulse. In regards to the explanation that was given, number one, they said, look, it was a scene. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have the right backup. I had to access the scene. I don't know who's the aggressor. That's okay. I understand that. But at the very least, you have someone that is injured, that is on the ground, that is bleeding out, where every second actually counts. And just as a matter of empathy, go check on him to see if he has a pulse. So I'm disappointed in that sense. I'm curious to see, because we know if it would have happened in New York, there's a possibility that they can be brought up on administrative charges, the officers, for at the very least not checking for a pulse and the mishandling of the crime scene itself and dealing with the deceased in this case.
Tamika, what do you think?
Well, if you're gasping, you're not dead. And at the very least, just as Bernarda indicated, there should have been some immediate aid given to the victim. The only person that can pronounce a death is a medical doctor. And so regardless of what the officer's observations are or what he assumes may or may not be, EMS or some emergency aid should have been called to the scene right away. They should have had someone, cater to the victim in this case to ensure that they were, being cared for, check the pulse, check, vitals, make sure that they were, safe for when the EMT arrives, and then could render additional medical assistance. In this case, it was none. And it gives room for the defense to actually, try to stir confusion in that lane, that had he had medical aid sooner, maybe the outcome could have been different. I doubt that they will go there because it's a dangerous path to walk on. They have to be careful in how they, approach what it is that they are arguing. And self-defense is the strongest argument that they have, though that in and of itself is still an uphill battle, but it's definitely unacceptable. There were a lot of flat-footedness with regard to all of the officers who responded to this, initial encounter, including the head prosecutor who, subsequently was charged.
Right. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation we can have. And you bring up a good point. We can come back to that. Alex, before we head to a break, in cross-examination, we also heard the suggestion that Arbery could have thrown a weapon. You actually caught that. You sent me a note, and we didn't bring that up earlier. Do you want to expand on that and how that could play into the trial?
Well, so during the cross-examination of Investigator Ramos, it was asked about how she set her perimeter whenever she began taking pictures, and you heard defense attorneys kind of pick at, well, you didn't look at the white truck, or you didn't look over here. Is it possible that that there could have been evidence outside of this perimeter that you shot photos of, and ultimately, kind of laid the groundwork for the idea that maybe somewhere throughout this chase, Ahmaud Arbery, with his cargo shorts, could have ditched some sort of weapon. Now, again, there is no evidence that suggests that Arbery was armed or had a weapon on him the day he was shot to death. That's something that we've heard throughout this case. I think also you heard the prosecution kind of re-steer that in a bit with the testimony from Minshew and that extended cell phone video showing the initial confrontation with defendant Bryan and Arbery, and then Arbery taking off, trying to kind of button that up a little bit. But it was something that we've heard the defense kind of hint at, that possibly there could be some gaps in the way this crime scene was processed.
Bernarda and Tamika, maybe I get you both to respond to that. Tamika, I can start with you. And we're talking about Sheila Ramos. She was the investigator, Glenn County investigator with the police department there, CID. She was a sergeant. She was the crime scene investigator, had to go and collect the evidence. There was a point made, there were a couple times where she made reference to things she wasn't looking at or paying attention to. One of the things, the white truck on the scene. What made it look like she was looking more inside versus outside, not having that sort of head on the swivel and the 360 situational awareness of everything around her, but rather focused right on the body. Which sort of leads an opportunity here, Tamika, possibly to talk about the fact that maybe Arbery did at some point have a weapon and was able to toss it. If she wasn't really looking at everything on the outside, just focused on the inside, could that work? Could that take this in a different direction, change the narrative?
It very well could. It very well could be a very impactful gaping hole that allows the defense to basically argue that the perimeter that was set was inadequate to cover what had actually happened. Now, as lawyers, you are confined to the facts that come with the case as it came. So all of the defendants made statements to the police when this had initially occurred. The critical thing is going to be whether any of those defendants made a statement and included in the statement that they saw Arbery throw something, discharge something that would give the defense the ability to then expand on that argument. If none of them mentions that, then the defense is going to be limited to some extent. But the defense's job is going to be to kick up enough confusion so that they can have a viable claim of self-defense. And if there is anything in there that gives wind that there was a weapon or someone saw a weapon or, assumed that there was a weapon or something that was thrown that could have been a weapon, then that's going to be something they're going to capitalize on. And had that been said and the police not followed up on it, that's going to, give even more room for fodder.
Bernarda, what do you think?
So when it comes to investigating a crime scene, what happens is that the crime scene investigator will come to the crime scene. The crime scene investigator would then be debriefed by a police officer or another investigator, detective, whoever it is, to get the information that they have in their possession at that moment. And they base their investigation of taking care of the crime scene, investigating the crime scene, based that they have. So this investigator, this crime scene investigator, obviously reacted to the information that she had and confined her investigation to that. So that's why we're stuck with the information that she gave us during her testimony. I will say this. Yes, sure, anything is possible, but do you have evidence? Do you have testimony that Ahmaud Arbery actually tossed a weapon or tossed an item? You don't have that. So the prosecution will have to refocus this jury, and they'll do it during closing arguments, is for them to focus on the testimony and the evidence that was put before them. Another point that I'll make is that during the testimony of this last former officer Minshew, remember the prosecutor asked this former officer, did William Bryan make any mention that he saw Ahmaud Arbery with a weapon? Did he make any mention that he saw Ahmaud Arbery toss an item? The answer is no. So the prosecution is going to come back during closing arguments and bring and tie that fact together, that there is no evidence, there is no testimony that Ahmaud Arbery tossed the weapon. So that is a non-starter in terms of trying to bring doubt from the crime scene investigator of what they failed to investigate. I will say this. In many cases, you get additional evidence after the day of the homicide, and usually a good investigation has a crime scene investigator going back to the scene and expanding their search to see if there's anything else that they can find based on the new information that was provided. And in this case, the new information would have been the video, the entire video that was provided by William Bryan.
Bernarda, Tamika, Alex, stay with me. Appreciate you three so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.